What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Biehl of EmpowermentUnlimited.net. And before we dive into today's show, I'm going to update the astrological forecast just a little bit. A reminder that you can find the full Astro Insight forecast at OMTimes.com and my site, EmpowermentUnlimited.net. Now, in the second half of April, we are starting ever so slightly to come off the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that everybody's been talking about, the once in every 150 plus years, meeting in the sign of Pisces. Bigger is better, meeting transcendence and unhooking from earthly, ordinary experience. And it's everything from still not knowing what day it is, to being very confused, to feeling inspiration just by looking out the window, to massively active dreams, being aware of other people very, very far away from you, heightened telepathy, being immersed in the plight of people on the other side of the globe that you'll probably never meet, and a lot of delusional thinking on the upsurge as well. As the month ends, as we go through to the beginning of May, Venus, the planet that rules our social interactions and what we value, in Pisces, gradually makes her way to meet with Neptune and then with Jupiter. So we'll be seeing possibly more of a sense of communing with other people, maybe idealizing, maybe people will be binge watching rom-coms. I've seen some of that going on. Escaping even more, creating unbelievable art that may not come to light for years and years. I will point out Lewis Carroll adopted that pen name the last time that Jupiter and Neptune were conjunct, and he ended up writing works that have stayed with us ever since. Anyway, so Mars is also in Pisces. There's just a huge emphasis on awareness of others, compassion, empathy, creativity, and yet we're not all completely out to lunch, although we may feel like it at times, because the planet of communication and starting tomorrow, the sun, are in Taurus, the first earth sign of the zodiac. Show me the money. I need to experience it with my senses, energy. So we'll be very much looking at the ground, being aware of the ground, possibly munching quite a bit more as we move through the remaining weeks of this cloudy, foggy Jupiter-Neptune conjunction and sail towards the first eclipse of the year, which is the Taurus new moon on the 30th. A lot more about that to come. At any rate, this does fit very nicely with today's topic. Our guest is Claire Gallagher, who calls herself a post-wellness ally, an anti-diet nutritionist, an intuitive movement counselor, and a medical astrologer. She holds master's degrees in acupuncture and nutrition and is a certified strength and conditioning specialist. She uses astrology as a tool for deepening personal authority, self-compassion, and body trust. She actually admits key parts of her chart, so I will share them. She's a Virgo Sun, Aquarius Moon, Sagittarius Rising, and the author of the just released book, Body Astrology. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, Kathy.
Well, we're going to have fun, everybody. We've been chatting a little bit beforehand, and I think this will go very, very nicely. You have kind of an unusual origin story about astrology. Can you tell us how you came to astrology?
Yeah, I actually came to astrology by avoiding it most of my life. I I grew up, in an evangelical home, and it was, in the water that astrology was just something we didn't do, something we didn't look at. And so I would read my little teeny bot magazines and try really hard never to look at the astrology portion in the back. But, I eventually, as I grew, developed some mysterious illnesses in my very early 20s. And so that put me on the path of alternative medicine and where I gathered my degrees. But while I was in school, I ran across a poster for a medical astrology conference while I was running to clinic. And all of a sudden I was like, I need to go to this. Something about the earth and nature of medical astrology kind of perforated my fear. So that's the shortest version.
So you immediately saw the applicability of it, the effectiveness. This is very efficient, how like a Virgo. I can use this to heal.
At first it was very like, I don't want to say selfish, but like, oh, I still have some things I don't understand about my health journey because it's very mysterious. I wonder if this will assist me at all. And I went to the conference and they were talking way over my head. I didn't understand a word, but at the same time, I had been immersed at that point in 4 years of acupuncture school. So like the elemental language of it really sat with me. So I was able to hang in there and I realized, wow, this is powerful. I want to use this. And immediately I became absolutely obsessed and started applying it in clinic, or at least observing patients in clinic, etc.
How did you learn it?
First I started tracking symptoms. That was actually my first doorway, is I started very, very simply with the lunar cycle and tracking my symptoms. And then I started tracking symptoms via more, slower astrological transits, different planets, and observing those patterns also in patients that I had in clinic. And then I decided to do a correspondence medical astrology course, and then eventually did an in-person astrology school in Portland, Oregon for a couple of years. And then I did some private tutoring. So kind of a hodgepodge approach. But I started with my body, for sure.
All right. So what you have done with this, you use this in your actual practice, not just for yourself, but with other people. And what led to actually systematizing this into this gigantic, beautiful reference work that I've got sitting at?
Thank you. That's so kind. Well, I never expected to write a book. It actually, they approached me. I just was so passionate about it and felt that it was so profound in uncovering my own, we all have blind spots in anything, and in health especially for my story. And so it was so just such a gentle way to be able to view all the parts of my body that maybe I put under the rug or I didn't pay attention to, or the traumas that I shoved under the rug that were attached to my symptomology. And astrology just had a really delicate way of uncovering those things. And I just wanted to use it. I don't know. I just became so excited about it, and studied and studied and applied and applied and applied, and just kind of like a mad scientist. I'm an Aquarius Moon, Jupiter conjunct, and I just went wild with the information, just gathering data.
And you've been sharing this in an online community?
Yeah, it's changed forms over the years. This is about my 8th year bringing all of this on the internet. And I've had a podcast at one point, and that was really fun. And I've been on Instagram for a while and shared there, but I also love to teach. And so right now I have an online community called Stellium, and we do videos and live streams, and we share about all this information together. Because for me, I've learned the most about astrology looking at other people's charts and hearing their experiences. So I really love the community vibe of that.
I certainly understand that. My counterpart to that is something will happen in the news, or
Yes.
someone will suddenly have a documentary, and I'll just say, I must see the astrology for this. Boom. And then you look at it and look at the chart and go, oh, yeah, okay, here are the archetypes in action. So you're just doing it in a very, very tangibly useful way. So you have created Body Astrology, a cosmic guide to health, healing, and harnessing the power of the planets. And it is actually, I look at it as a reference work. I mean, I could see how people would start to read it all the way through, but probably would be better using it as a reference once they get the hang.
100% agree. Yeah, that's how I wanted it to be. And I even told my best friends who wanted to read it cover to cover, this is not a cover to cover read. This is a read the introduction and then flip around and pick it up when you need it and then pick it up again. It's just something that can be referenced over and over and over again. So I'm so glad that that made it through, because that was my intention for sure.
Well, I do plow through things, and I found myself after getting the lay of the land, when you started going into detail about each planet, I looked at it and went, I don't think I need to read every word right now. I think I'll use it as a reference book. But there are some things, there are some concepts that I want to alert people to and start with. You reframe the houses in a sense, or you have isolated the 4 healing houses with really helpful labels for them. The first house being whole body, the 6th house being daily body, 8th house, where my ruling planet is, and I will agree with this one, chronic body, and 12th is hidden body. How did you, what would you like to say about any of that?
I think the houses are always a work in progress for me. I feel like I'm learning more and more and more about them and the body every day that I'm practicing. But, I first learned about the houses of health from my teacher's teacher, who is Judith Hill. And so these weren't the labels that she gave them, but this is how I interpreted it throughout my own work. And I just really wanted to reframe the houses, because sometimes these houses can be a little scary. And, I'm a traditional astrologer, so some of the old language is a little frightening. And so I wanted to do this in a way where I was paying respect to the tradition and saying, yes, bad things can occur. And there are spins to all of these houses where you can use them to your benefit. And so that's where the labels came from. Does that answer your question initially?
Yes, and actually what I would say here is that most people in kind of a cookbook knee-jerk way would look at a chart and go, okay, 6th house is the house of the body and health. But you're showing like, well, there are other houses that have information that could be useful.
Absolutely. And in fact, I honestly, in a consult, read all of the houses via the lens of the body. But for the book, I had to make it digestible. And so, the first house, I really see it as our physicality. It's very structural and also really like a gatekeeper. That sign and the planets in that house really allow things to come in or things to exit the body. So it's really a very physical area, but also an immunity area. Whereas the 6th house, if we only paid attention to that, we would miss all of the other nuances that the other houses give us. But the 6th house is definitely more about, clues, like what might feel good nourishment-wise day to day, or what might aggravate us day to day that would later turn into an 8th house problem, where we might sit on our hands and not pay attention to it, or maybe it creates a long-standing condition. And then the 12th house, oh gosh, very mental, emotional, very connected in my experience to traumas, and things that don't often see the light of day, or we're not readily, we don't want to talk about, but they're very, very real, and depending on the aspects and connections and the rulerships can definitely be connected to a condition you're having. So that's the crash course.
And the 12th house is the house of institutions, so you might end up in the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also how you rejuvenate yourself, right? When you step out of your everyday and...
Thank you for saying that. I'm so used to like looking at the chart pathologically that sometimes I forget these wonderful spins for, the 12th house is like, how do I restore? How do I retreat? I love the word retreat for the 12th house. How do I just really, break away from all of the noise externally?
Increasingly a challenge these days. Mm-hmm. We're coming up towards the first break, and when we come back, I'm going to want to start with the notion of astro-seasonal layering. Mm-hmm. So for people to wonder what in the world I'm talking about, hang on, and we'll be back real soon.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. Today we're talking about body astrology, a topic and a book, with the book's author, Claire Gallagher. And this book gives multiple avenues for applying astrology to the body, in the ways of using astrology, and then also the different aspects of your body, movement, routine, health issues, diet. And I want to start with the notion of astro-seasonal layering, which is has this nice graphic with a series of concentric circles that starts with the birth chart. and what that might show about your inclinations or needs for, or how you're, where you are in with food and movement. And then you apply to that the lunar cycle throughout the month, and then transits, larger cycles that go throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I this was the best way I could simplify medical astrology for maybe anyone who picked up the book and it was their first astrology book ever, because there are so many, like you said, there's so many doorways into astrology, so many doorways into body astrology, medical astrology. And so this is what I found, especially with newer clients, kind of a map of how to start using astrology to feel more at ease in their body. And so I always start with the birth chart, and particularly the moon, I found in consultation is really, really important for me to pay attention to, and the moon ruler. And so I'll introduce a client to the birth chart and really just start with workshopping how they can meet the needs of their chart. And then when they feel really confident with that, then we'll explore how those needs may wax and wane throughout the month. And again, exploring how we can meet those needs as they change instead of rejecting them or thinking they should be different than they are, really learning how to embrace the body as it changes. And then when they feel ready, then we'll start bringing in the longer transits. And how they can really affect our vitality and also create new needs. So even though our birth charts never change, transits can, create a different elemental vibe in the body or different weather pattern, and it requires different attention, different medicines, different food, different movement, different ways of attending to the body. Yeah, so that's the basics of this seasonal layering wheel here.
Leading to, you actually have looked at the elements, air, earth, wind, and fire. Air, earth, water, and fire. There, I am being a soul group. As body types. So someone can start to look at the predominance in their chart of element, and you give information about what this might mean for them.
Yeah, and this is something I focus on a lot, like in my small community, is teaching people how to really understand their temperament or their constitution or their elemental body type, and learning that one is not better than the other. Even though culturally we might think sanguine is best and phlegmatic is not, really learning to embrace one's elemental dominance and understand that, each element needs something different to thrive. And so that's where one-size-fits-all approaches just really has no place in this work, because there's so much diversity, not just elementally, but then sign-wise, et cetera.
And then as the book goes on, you actually have a breakdown for each planet with a tremendous amount of information. And so there are a number of ways that people could go into this. And before we get into that, a bigger, broader question that I probably should have started with: if someone starts flipping through this and they become overwhelmed, what might be an entry point for them?
Yeah,
Does it depend?
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic answer for me. It depends. But what I have settled on is if they want to start with their birth chart, I always settle on the moon. So read the chapter or the section on your natal moon sign and start there. And if someone's like, oh, I don't really care, I'm really interested in, how astrology is moving, then I would start with the lunar cycle. So at the beginning of the book, and embracing cyclicality and just working with all of the elements as they move month to month. But usually I'll say, hey, why don't you just start with the moon, and then you can branch out from there.
So the way that you have approached the different, not just the moon, but each of the planets and the sun, people are used to, this is what it means, this is what you're like. But you have a template here that is quite different than what most people will have encountered, starting with the notion of imbalances and strengthening or balancing.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, sorry.
No, how does that work?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is, it flowered out of my education in Chinese medicine and in acupuncture school. And so the way I was taught originally to view the elements is that they can present as excess or deficient, and that those excess and deficient presentations may develop into symptom patterns. And so in order to address the symptom pattern, we would need to rebalance the element or bring in an opposing quality or opposing element. And so I applied that to the Western idea of the planets and this elemental system. And it really works quite beautifully. And so like if someone's a fire type and they express as excess fire, then I teach in the book that we can bring in water therapeutics, and I list what those might be, or we can decrease fire or tweak it just slightly with some things that are still resonant with fire, but a little less hot. And so I explain in the book what types of foods those might be, or what types of movement that might be. But balancing, to me, is a really essential part of medical astrology, understanding how elements work together and balance one another, because it really makes all the signs useful tools for somebody. So instead of someone just getting stuck on, oh, I'm a Virgo, then they understand, oh, but water element's really important for me because Pisces is across the street and it balances me, or air is important because it lightens me up. And so I think understanding that really unlocks astrology and allows us to connect with other signs that we might not otherwise connect with. They're all tools.
Yeah, I mean, you do look at everybody having all of the signs somewhere in their chart and somewhere that they can work with. Yeah,
that's a passion of mine. I really like to hit that point hard, because I've just seen it be true for so many of us, or you can be a Scorpio but have so much happening in another sign transit wise that your body's presenting like a Leo, and so you might have heat and all this stuff that you wouldn't expect. And so it's really helpful to understand all of the signs and all of their body areas, because you can use their therapeutics to balance your constitution out when the need arises.
And you have this book is filled with charts. You have very specific suggestions. And actually, in some cases, a person could actually just look at charts and go, oh, this is what I'm experiencing, and come at it that way in a kind of backwards. Start with the symptom.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that is also something I intentionally did for people that were newer to this practice, because I wanted this book to be accessible. And so I think somewhere in the end of the book where I talk about transits or I introduce the planets, I think I say something almost exactly like what you just mentioned. Like, if you don't know what planet to work with, just go through the charts and identify your physical experience and see what planet most likely correlates with it. So that's also a great doorway. It's just, what are you experiencing and who typically expresses that way, and work backwards, like you said.
And for each sign, you actually detail the parts of the body that could be involved or affected if that sign is active. And beautifully, the illustration for each sign right over that highlights the part of the body that you're talking about. This is very, very masterfully done.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Caitlin Keegan is the illustrator, and I just couldn't be more pleased with the work that she did. It is excellent, and it fits great with the vibe of the book. So I'm really happy with it.
But it also presents the information in a way that somebody who is perhaps getting a little overwhelmed by words could just flip through and go, show the doctor where it hurts, and just sort of point at the pictures, and it would work very, very nicely.
Absolutely.
So with each of the planet, you have I'm not quite sure. Do you use the term gesture?
Yes, I do. Yep.
And
I do that for the signs as well. Yeah.
Okay. And gesture would mean?
Yeah. A gesture to me is like, it's sort of like a riff on keywords, if you will. But I think of all the planets as, forces that act on the body or act inside of the body. And we can think of that pathologically, like maybe Jupiter brings too much moisture or Saturn brings too much dryness. But we can also think of that from a nurturing perspective. And so if we want to work with, let's say, the moon's gesture in astrology and body astrology is to nourish. And so in this book, instead of saying you should eat this, you should not eat that, I wanted to focus on gestures so that people could learn to nourish without falling into diet culture or lists of foods they should and should not eat. And so the gesture kind of lifts the seriousness off, the categorization off, and allows people to apply the information to a broader context. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that is the word you're using for this nice little keyword I see next to each planet. The section on using the planets to heal has, at least in the table of contents, or it starts with the gesture for that body. And so, for example, sun is brightening, which would be bringing light to, warming up. What would that be?
Yeah, great. Yeah, so it's speaking to whatever charges your battery. So in medical astrology, the sun is our vital force. We could also think of it as a generator, whereas the moon receives the sun's light and it churns it through the body. So it moves the energy through. But the sun has to be healthy and strong in order for us to be alive, right? And so I'm also kind of doing a play on words here of the sun, when it gets ill, often has to do with the sense of self being clouded over, or the identity being clouded over, or a disconnect from our authentic or sun nature. And so learning to brighten that aspect of ourselves is part of sun medicine. The sun often isn't very physical. It's more mental planet, conscious planet. And so that is what I'm speaking to here, is getting in connection with your authentic light and brightness. And how, if you're disconnected from that, it can express as pathology.
How it can express itself. Okay, well, you've certainly seen, it's easy. People say, I've lost myself, or I've just I've found myself. And definitely with the sun about to move into Taurus, that might be a very easy time for people to start looking at their body and going, oh, I am here. I am in this. This is what I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm just going to go through this list then. Mercury. Connecting. I found that makes all the sense in the world, although I would have never said that. So the communication planet, how our mind works and stuff, and our mouths, you say the gesture is connecting. So how does that work?
Yeah, so Mercury takes vital messages in the body and gets them to where they need to go. So it's kind of the orchestra leader of all the organs, and therefore all the planets and all the signs from a physical perspective. And so we want our Mercury to be connecting. That's the gesture we want it to have. We want our nervous system to work. We want to be able to think and connect with other people. But if Mercury is too slow or too fast, maybe it's in a sign that makes it really hot and agitated, or in a sign that, it has to slog through the mud, we might experience cognitive imbalances, or we might experience depression, or we might experience anxiety if it's really hot. So Mercury is basically our nervous system. And if Mercury is moving through a hot sign, we might see a nervous system that is hyper responsive, feeling like there's threat and danger everywhere. If Mercury is in a water or earth sign, it might be the opposite, where we're a little slower, maybe sad, having slower reaction times. And so both Mercuries whether it's fast or slow, needs attention. And so I list those ways out in the chapter of how to care for either side.
And then when the Mercury transit that everybody seems to know is, of course, Mercury retrograde, so that would throw another wrinkle into this, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, I mean, we could think of a Mercury retrograde as very slow. So a quote from Body Astrology, a deficient Mercury perhaps, but it would also depend on what sign it's having its retrograde travels through. But yeah, when Mercury is retrograde, I always want to tonify the brain and the nervous system. And so that often means slowing things down, lots of nervous system slowing activities like breath work, embodiment, etc., and eating really nutrient-dense foods that kind of, give Mercury the tools that it needs. Yeah, but Mercury retrograde, definitely Mercury needs a little bit more TLC during that time.
Well, I'll need to remember that since one is coming up.
I know.
All right.
Lucky us.
Venus, softening.
Yeah.
Okay. So Venus I see
Yeah.
as an influence of indulgence. I get this image of the goddess lounging on her side with a sheet draped over her.
Yeah, and in medical astrology, what Venus does is it softens the zodiacal body areas. So if Venus is in Pisces, we would think theoretically that it would bring a lax or a softening or an opening, which is a nice word for softening, to the Piscean parts of the body, which include the blood, which include other fluids of the body, as well as the feet, etc. But softening can mean a lot of other things. So if we have too much softness, maybe the water of Pisces begins to pool, and then we might see growth of some kind, like a toenail fungus or something like that. So,
and with that, I'm going to interrupt you for our second break, and we'll come back to. All right, hang on, people. Come back in a few minutes.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Claire Gallagher, author of Body Astrology. And just before the break, we were talking about some of the downsides of Venus softening to the point that you end up with some problems. And that's when I interrupted you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, Venus is funny that way, and Jupiter is very similar in this way, is that when it's in excess or it's too wet, too moist, it definitely can create dampness in the body, which AKA ends up as fungal yeast infections, high blood glucose, all of that stuff is associated with wetness. And so Venus is lovely, and sometimes we have to make sure Venus stays in bounds, for sure.
Which she does not like. And speaking of having to bound something back in, Mars energizing. Mm-hmm. I can see that going overboard easily. What can you tell us about Mars?
100%. 100%. So Mars is what keeps the body humming. It's very important for protection of the body and fighting off pathogens and invasion, for sure, but it's also very primary in the stress response. And so, of course, in our day and time, most of the Mars imbalances I see are not dog bites or things like that, but I am extremely burnt out, or I am almost burnt out, that really fine line between gunning it all the time and I can't get out of bed because I'm so exhausted. Usually those types of fatigues are martial in nature. So in this section, I list out how we can really bring Mars more into a balanced state of knowing when to pull back and not exert so much, and when it's time to exert, and using Mars transits wisely, teaching us, when we might have a little bit more and when we might need to say no a little bit more frequently.
And heads up, everybody, Mars is going home to Aries next month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So enjoy his time in the pool now. Okay. Mm-hmm. Jupiter. Now, I call this the planet of indulgence. More. And you have satisfying as the gesture.
Yeah. What I really wanted to do, my work as an anti-diet nutritionist is really came through in the Jupiter chapter, because I think it's really important for us to undo this diet culture mentality that we have to restrict. And so usually when I see a Jupiter imbalance, a lot of it is a yo-yo effect from long-term restriction in the past. And so even though it's very scary potentially for us to satisfy our bodies, it's a really important part of Jupiter self-care. And so I try, and it's delicate and it's difficult, but I try to work with that concept in this chapter, where we can learn how to satisfy and take care of ourselves in a way that's pleasurable without feeling afraid or feeling like we're going to have out of control experiences with food or movement, etc.
And then the next planet will make sure that won't happen. And that is Saturn. You say fortifying. I might not have used such a kind word. All right, so talk about Saturn, the party pooper of the zodiac.
I know. So what I'm trying to do with these gestures is teach people that we can use even difficult transits beneficially. So when we're having a really crappy Saturn transit, like Saturn on the moon or Saturn square Saturn or Saturn return, what the body needs is fortification, because Saturn steals from us and from our bodies. And it literally can manifest as malnutrition or not having the resources that you need to feel supported and sustained. And so that's why I chose fortifying, not necessarily because Saturn's going to fortify you, but because we want you to fortify you during a Saturn transit. But it is also true that Saturn is in charge of creating structure in the body. So there's a little bit there. But Saturn and Mars, they create the most difficulty in the body. It's just that Saturn brings cold conditions, which are restricting and weakening, whereas Mars creates inflammatory imbalances. So for Saturn, we want to give the body nutrients and warmth, and we want to give the mind comfort as well. It can be very, very serious, as you know.
Do you look at the skeletal structure with Saturn?
Yeah, absolutely. So that again, like I think I talk about bone nutrition somewhere in the book, probably in the Capricorn chapter. But yeah, I expand that idea of the skeletal system to include boundaries as well. So mental, emotional boundaries, and also the skin, and also just embodiment, and how Saturn can teach us to make friends with this thing that we are in, even though that can be very difficult sometimes. So yeah. Teeth, bones, anything hard.
And breakable.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, Saturn can make us brittle, and that's when things go awry.
And the thing that breaks things is coming up next. Uranus. I agree with liberating. Not that it's my place to agree or disagree, but I think most people would be able to, that would resonate with people who know anything at all about astrology. Like, oh yeah, that's the positive spin on what this buddy does.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm trying to take that positive spin because health is so delicate. So essentially what I'm saying here is when we're having a Uranus transit, or maybe we have a Uranus Moon conjunction in our natal chart, etc., our self-care is going to be tied in very intimately with this idea of liberation, or this idea of don't tell me what to do, or this idea of I need autonomy when it comes to making my health decisions. And so I do explain how, when Uranus transits occur, anything's up in the air, but we want to give our bodies a nice container so that we are ready for the change that is coming. So creating whatever regularity you can in your food, in your movement, in your routine, so that Uranus can do the work it wants to do and you're available for it in a positive sense.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Because
leave it to me with Uranus on the ascendant. Yeah.
Right. Well, but okay. So we both have Aquarius active in our charts, and my experience of heavy Aquarian energy has been that the interior landscape is so volatile that you need the outside world to stay in this, where you left it. It needs to still be there the next time you look at it, or you might go nuts. And this sounds like you're telling people basically to create that framework for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. To create some type of container so that they feel safe enough to change, to do this Uranian thing that's happening, whether they want it to or not. To create some measure of safety during something that can otherwise feel very unsafe and very alarming.
And then Neptune, here's the choice.
I chose the opposite.
Is embodying.
Yeah, so I know. I played with, the common, transcending and all of that. But from a physical perspective, that rarely is therapeutic from a nuts and bolts perspective. So when I have a client that's having a Neptune transit, they're so disembodied or feeling disempowered or feeling like the medical conditions associated with Neptune are so disassociating. They're very difficult. And so when I have a client going through a Neptune transit, we're always focusing on getting back in the body and making friends with the body so that it's a safe space to inhabit. Because otherwise Neptune conditions continue to meander and be without boundary. And so even though it is very it's not very popular to say embodying for Neptune. It's like the opposite of its natural energy. I think it's really important to embody during a Neptune transit. And that's what I'm doing with this section.
That also makes a whole lot of sense. And we're all undergoing an extraordinary Neptune transit right now. And I have found when people say, how are you doing? You just kind of look at them like, or what have you been doing? I can't tell you. I don't know what I've been doing. And I said that to someone yesterday and she took issue with it. And then I said, but then I looked at her later and went, and what have you been doing? She was like, well, I don't know. I went, see, that's my point. So it would be very useful for everybody right now, it sounds like, to do things that put them back in their body in a healthy way.
Yeah. And so I explain here the planetary opposites of Neptune from a elemental perspective, and that this might actually be a time we might want to work with Saturn therapeutics because Saturn contains Neptune. It astringes it. It gives it some boundary. Or maybe we want to work with Mars so that we wake up a little bit. Or maybe we want to work with Mercury so we're not so confused. And that's how we can bring the other planets on board to help us during a difficult transit.
And then we have the one that scares everybody,
I know.
Pluto.
Yeah.
And you put surrendering. That's interesting because some people would associate surrender with Neptune, but what you've got is like resistance is futile. It's the Borg. Yeah, that's coming.
I know. Yeah, that's kind of the route I was going. Is like Pluto is very serious. You're undergoing a massive life transformation in one area or another, and it is sometimes futile to fight against the forces of Pluto. And so in this chapter, I talk instead about strengthening the parts of the chart that Pluto is afflicting. And so let's pretend it's the sun. So instead of working with Pluto directly, I wouldn't recommend that as a medical astrologer. I would work with strengthening the parts of your astrological anatomy that are being affected so that you have some resource and you have some resilience, because this is a long-term transit and you're going to need to be strong for it. So I don't really ask people to work with Pluto directly. It's more like, this is what Pluto does, and here's what you can do to survive a Pluto transit. Yeah, so surrendering to the process.
Or to evolve from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or regenerate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, one piece that you add to all of this is recommending movement, depending on whether there's a deficiency or an excess. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I tried to keep these sections broad because I think when we say, water signs should swim, we're going to alienate a whole bunch of people that don't care about swimming. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm saying transits are opportunities to give the body new things. Transits they implement change in our physicality, and so we might have to change the way we do things in order to make the most of a transit or to feel well during a transit. And so because I have the Neptune page open right now, if someone were going through a Neptune transit, what I would coach them in their movement practice is to view whatever they're doing as an art form, and maybe to release structure around movement. For example, I must move a certain times per day or days per week or for this amount of time or do this exact program. Instead, it's like loosening up that structure and allowing the body to intuitively move, because that's maybe how Neptune would do it. Does that make sense?
Right. So it would be going from doing a foxtrot to what started passing for dancing in the 60s and 70s, when you just kind of throw your arms and legs around to the music.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Maybe we should all crank it up right now and do that, is what it sounds like to me.
Lots of intuitive movement right now, for sure. Yeah, I just want through movement and food, what I'm essentially asking readers to do is, this transit's going to express no matter what. I'd rather it not expressed as a disease process or as a symptom. So why don't we take care of ourselves in a beneficial way that also allows the planet's energy to express naturally? So sort of using movement as a medicinal so that the planet has a channel in order to express itself.
And movement's also associated with the signs too, right?
Yeah, or I did
that.
so. No, you got it. Okay. Yeah, I did talk about movement for each sign and just gave general guidelines for how this sign might want to move in order to feel connected and its best. But again, there's no rules in this book. There are lists, there are charts, but that's why I relied on gestures. So you can apply the gesture to any movement that pleases you, but it can still be connected to a particular sign.
Well, I will just tell everybody listening out there to not be daunted by this. If you have even a slight understanding of your chart or astrological basics, you can certainly pull very useful information out of this. And I kind of look at this as the more detailed astrological corollary to Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life, basically. So instead of looking at, here's a little affirmation for when you have yet another urinary tract infection, to look at, okay, what are the things going on astrologically that you can work with? Anyway, I hope that's helpful. I appreciate your being with us. Can you tell people where they can find you and your book?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me online at clairegallagher.co, and that's ClaireGallagher.co. You can find me on Instagram at the Body Astrologer, and you can find my book, Body Astrology, basically wherever books are sold, both in person and online, or at my publisher, roofbooks.com.
And is that Shambhala? Is that an imprint of Shambhala?
Yeah, it's an imprint of Shambhala. Yes.
Yeah. And again, everyone, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. So I encourage you to get it. And
thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, Claire. And everybody, hang on, come back in a couple of weeks, and we'll be doing something absolutely goofy. You will love it. Right in time for the eclipse. So that's how I'm going to have some astrological medicine for what we're going through.
Love it.
And my forecasts are, as always, at OMTimes.com and EmpowermentUnlimited.net and the Professional Aquarian YouTube channel. Talk to you in 2 weeks, and thanks again, Claire.
Thank you.